Can we use the mind to dissolve the mind? Yes or no? If we're talking about full dissolution of the mind, okay, totally dissolving, annihilating the self-identifying, self-crystallizing mind, no. Eventually, the mind has to be dissolved by no mind, meaning we get to a point where the state of no mind, the state where the appearance of the self, of being an individual self, is absent, okay, and then we keep returning to that state, we keep kind of steeping ourselves in that state, and the mind gets completely dissolved in that. So ultimately, no, we can't use the mind to dissolve the mind. But initially, we can. To get off the ground, we can. Because initially, we don't have access to that state. Yeah, we all have little gaps between our thoughts. We all have little moments of openness in meditation, but they're not long enough initially to really make that our sole practice. So, initial way to use the mind to dissolve the mind is to kind of catch a hold of some thoughts, some wise concepts, some wise reflections that make a lot of our other thoughts, a lot of our more other painful thoughts, more ignorant thoughts, they help us to relax out of them. Okay, so that's how we use the mind to dissolve the mind or overcome the mind initially. For me, personally, I'll say the way that I did this before I got into just this practice of returning again and again and again to the natural state. I was thinking about impermanence. I was thinking about how whatever happens, because for instance, usually we're, our worries about things are not as we want them to be. Things are like this, but I'd like them to be like that. Life is being a bit inconvenient. That's usually what our worrying is about. And what I would think to myself is this. I would think, let's say everything in my life comes together perfectly, exactly as I want it to come together. It won't stay like that forever, okay? Because that's not how life works. Life is not a static thing. Life is always moving, right? Things will change, things will come apart, things will separate. And at the end of all of this form that I'm identified with its name and whatsoever, with its history, with its preferences, this will die, this will be finished, this will be no more, right? So I was thinking to myself, okay, I can, if I want to, really go in and try and control everything, try to make everything perfect and use all my energy to do that. But that will be a lifelong effort, a lifelong energy expense to try and keep everything together. And in the midst of that, I'll be suffering, I'll be scared. There'll be this feeling, okay, I've just got everything how I want it, now it looks like things are changing. How's that going to make me feel? Fearful, angry, sad, right? It's not going to feel good. So this made me realize that in a way, this samsaric existence has its own eternity to it. It has its own infinity to it. And what I mean by that is that you can never escape samsara on its own terms. You can never win this game just by finally managing to control everything. Because everything is always slipping out of your hands. One thing slips out of your hands, you try to grab another thing. As you try to grab the other thing, something else is slipping out and getting away from you. So, thinking about these things when I was having, bad times or whatever, just made me let go. And realise that this is life. This is how life is. Even if everything again looks perfect tomorrow, that's not going to last. And the more I get attached to these times or these states which seem perfect, which seem fortunate, which seem ideal, which seem positive, the more I get attached to these things and think, oh yes, now I'm okay, now everything's perfect, the more pain will await me when these things look like they're going to change or they just dissolve, full stop. So thinking about this just allowed me to let go of things and think, okay, things are as they are. Let's let things take their own course and see what happens. But I'm going to be more okay. I'm going to be more content with whatever happens. Because being obsessed with what happens, using what happens as your sole source of happiness and fulfillment, this is a game you can never win. Right. So for me, this is how I used the mind to kind of defeat the mind in a way. I mean, I was still using thoughts, but these thoughts that I'm talking about here, about impermanence and whatever, these thoughts were pointing towards letting go. These thoughts were pointing towards being content with whatever I have now, with however things are now. So I'm not saying that everybody should use these thoughts, but we should find a certain stream of thinking that helps us, which helps make all the other thoughts seem less intense, less binding. Right. And I think this stream of thinking about impermanence is very powerful because it actually exposes all the other kind of thinking and our obsessing about this and that as kind of nonsensical. So for me, this is a very powerful method. And eventually, through that, through letting go, through the practice of simply becoming unconditionally content with what is, because you know things are going to change anyway. By doing this, eventually you get access to a state of stillness, a state of contentment, a state of where the experience of being a self is mitigated, is highly subdued. So eventually we won't even have to use this medium of thinking about impermanence or whatever. We can go straight to that source, and then that becomes the practice. It's like, okay, we'll go into some stream of thinking, worrying or whatever, but then we remember, there's this state that I accessed where all of that is just unimportant, let me go back there. So eventually that becomes the practice, but that practice is not immediately accessible to everybody on the path. So one of the things I'd recommend before that is to find a stream of thinking, a stream of wisdom that disarms the other type of thinking, the type of thinking which is endlessly propagating, endlessly thinking, oh, now this, now that, now the... Again, samsara has its own kind of infinity to it. It has its own kind of endlessness to it. To get out of that, we must stop being obsessed with it. Right? And when we know that this total happiness, uninterrupted happiness that we seek, when we know that we cannot achieve this on samsara's own terms, on the terms of being an individual in relation to other individuals, as being someone who owns things, possesses things, right? We cannot attain that state on those terms. That state is only accessible when all of that stuff isn't there. And eventually, once we've seen through the illusion of being a permanent self entity.